Welcome to today's Energy Central webcast.
Titled From Automation to Orchestration, a path forward for utility leaders in the AI era. We're so glad you're joining us. Before we get started, we certainly want to send a big thank you to the sponsor of today's event, Centric. Without them, today's event would not be possible. So we're glad to have them on the event today. And now happy to hand the floor over to our moderator and first speaker, Mike Smith, to kick things off. Mike, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
All right. Thank you, PJ, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We've got a great session in store for you, some great panelists. We've done a fair amount of prep going into this, so I think we're ready to have a really great, engaging discussion. A couple of things. One, as PJ mentioned, if you do have questions for the panel, please drop them into the chat, which you'll see the icon on the right side of your screen. We do incorporate those into the discussion, so we're definitely looking forward to hearing from you all in the audience and making that part of today's session. What we will be doing is I'll be introducing our speakers in just a moment. We'll dive into the panel discussion, but first, what we like to do is just have a little bit of kind of industry data and a few kind of data points that'll help us kind of frame some of the issues we'll be talking about. So we'll dive into that right now. And this first piece of information is, of course, you can see the AI market is growing. I think we all know that, but this just kind of frames it in terms of what's going on in the utility space. One thing that leaked out to me was the continued growth of the on-premises AI investments. I think for the utility industry, what's going to be interesting as these data sets continue to grow, how much of that is going to be cloud-based, how much of that's going to be on-prem, and of course, there's hybrids, et cetera. Just as we think about that, one way I look at it, I tend to simplify things, maybe oversimplify things, is I look at meter data. And if you think back to the pre-smart meter days, that was 12 data events a year, right? They would read your meter once a year, however they did that. You switch to 15-minute interval reads, which for the last 15 years has kind of become the standard. That becomes over 35,000 data events per meter. Now we're seeing AMI 2.0, and my local utility here, for instance, I'm a SMUD customer here in Northern California. They've launched an AMI 2.0 initiative. Now you're going to have over 105,000 data events per meter per year. Those data sets are just going to be massive. So I think we'll keep an eye on that and see where that goes. But moving right along, we were going to also look at some of the top use cases. I think what we're going to do here is just look at a few and have a little bit of commentary on each one. I don't think there'll be any surprises here. But again, we want people to be thinking in terms of what's going on in their organization and how that's going to relate to what we're talking about today, and where maybe there'll be a few insights you can apply. So looking at the first set of AI use cases, we see around the predictive maintenance and asset management space, some really cool things happening around asset monitoring, the computer vision for different types of asset inspections. I think that's really interesting. Part of that, of course, also is vegetation management. And just a brief comment on that is we're seeing obviously more and more of this, but two quick comments on this. One is that I've done some early work on this over 10 years ago, and we were able to identify species types, soil types, and be able to be much more predictive on those tree trimming processes that's part of the veg management program. The challenge was, and this is part two of this, is a lot of the utilities are set up when we went and took these different solutions. They're set up on very almost restrictive budgeting cycles, where we said, you don't have to trim this certain species of tree as much as you do, and you can, we're on budget cycle, a 3-year budget cycle, and that makes it really difficult to change. So I think the opportunity is there for utilities to see some real gains and real benefits in the veg management space. So moving on to the next one, we will comment very briefly on wildfire protection in the smart grid optimization and operations space. Again, I'm here in Northern California, so we know a lot about the wildfire issues out here. But I think what we've seen since some of the catastrophic fires we've had is obviously more emphasis, more investment in the space. And a lot of that is absolutely AI driven, where we have, for instance, most utilities now have very extensive weather station networks. They deal with third-party weather data, and they're much more predictive in terms of where they're going to do the public safety power shutdowns, how they're going to react to things based on information they have now that they didn't have before. So wildfire protection is definitely an area to keep an eye on as we go forward here. Next, we will look at renewable energy integration and forecasting. Again, exciting stuff happening here. Even the generation forecasting and storage optimization space. There's been some really interesting work done in these areas. And of course, virtual power plants is becoming a really important part of that kind of utility operations suite. And this is another area where if you think about how VPPs work and that need for that real to near real time availability of that data to make those decisions and put those virtual power plants into action, boy, it's a whole new world. And again, if you're a follower of the Energy Central Power Sessions, we've done some sessions on this, and it's really interesting. It's very impactful in terms of not just operations and reshaping the load curve, but there's a good financial story there as well. And then on the next one we're going to look at is around advanced demand forecasting and energy trading. Demand forecasting, I think, is something that we as an industry can do a lot better now than we did even just a few years ago. And again, it comes back to that wealth of data from smart meters and even third-party data sources, including weather, where you can really be very predictive about what demand is and help manage that load curve, particularly on very high temperature days or other types of emergencies. And then finally, we're going to look at a couple of customer examples here. And I think the one that we will look at is mostly around the conversational AI and chatbots. Most utilities have some activity going in this space. I think other industries may be farther ahead. I know when I deal with things like insurance and banking, there's definitely a very strong play here on that side of things. And I think there's a fine line to walk here between making sure you're getting those benefits from using conversational AI and chatbots, to making sure the customer still has that really good experience. And that's a pretty fine balancing act for utilities and other instances as well. So moving forward, just a couple more comments. The first being, as we look at the data and AI space, I've looked at a lot of industry data going into this, and one organization surveyed, I think it was 600 utilities. They're all saying we're doing something with AI. We have a pilot. We're doing proofs of concept. We're doing different things with our data. We're starting to be predictive. Maybe it's around assets or customers or demand forecasting. So they're all exploring how this is going to work. Where it becomes challenging is a couple of areas. One is that issue around data quality. I've been in industry for 36 years. I've been really deep in AI and analytics for the last 15 years. That darn data issue just will not go away. I think there's some tools available, and that has gotten better. And I think we're going to hear about that from some of our panelists today. But that data quality is so important. Data management, data governance, for you to be able to do a lot of these really high value analytics and AI applications. And then finally, how do utilities really measure and prove that ROI from these AI investments? This is something that also continues to be elusive for utilities. And you can picture, if you will, the C-suite saying, "Hey, we've just spent X millions of dollars on all this intelligent infrastructure, and I want to see more of a result. I can't open the Wall Street Journal or Business Week or turn on CNBC and not hear about AI. Why aren't we taking advantage of that the way I see other industries taking advantage of that?" So I think there is probably some frustration as an industry around achieving that ROI, and I think we're going to dive into that as well today. So those are some opening thoughts for what we want to get into today. What I'm going to do next is we're going to hear from our panel. I'm going to introduce each one and ask them an opening question. And what's interesting about today's panel, in addition to having some great utility expertise, we have some expertise from outside the utility industry, which I think is going to continue to be very helpful in terms of, hey, here's some new ways we can be doing things around our data management, how we're applying AI, what are some use cases, those sorts of things. So to jump in and get started, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, and that's Don Hurley, who is the head of generative AI, agile, and IT delivery services at Westfield Insurance. Don has over 25 years of technology expertise in both technical and leadership roles. His experience includes leadership roles across all facets of IT, including application development, portfolio management, infrastructure, and operations. Don's career has been highlighted with being at the forefront of numerous transformations using his unique creative approaches to creating value through technology, process, and people. That's the trick, Don, is all three of those. Don's most current focus has been on advancing generative AI at Westfield. The result is a functioning governance team, driving a change management team, and an engaged employee base, and of course, a development team aimed at bringing value in terms of business efficiency and expense management using generative AI technology. His passion for helping unlock high-performing teams and individuals is part of his secret sauce for success. We are definitely going to explore that with you today, Don. Welcome to today's session. I would like to ask you an opening question to get us started. So, one of the things that we see in the utility industry is challenges with a lot of technology initiatives, not necessarily just AI, around scaling beyond pilots. So I can think back to 25, 30 years ago when it was substation automation. There was every utility had a pilot going on. But you know what, Mr. or Ms. Utility Leader, you have 250 substations. When are you going to do that at all 250? Similarly, with a lot of what we're seeing with the AI space, which I'll include data and analytics in that same space, there's definitely some really great success stories and some really interesting use cases, but also a lot of, okay, we haven't really scaled this yet. Is it a technology thing? Is it, to your point, is it a people and process thing? So I was going to ask you for kind of your insights on how do you all get beyond that initial pilot and go to production at scale? Is it governance? Is it leadership? Is it technology? But what are some of your thoughts on that would help our audience think, okay, hey, yeah, we have the same issue. What can we do to move forward? So what can you help us with there, Don?
I feel like that could be a whole 90-minute discussion.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. Appreciate the time to be able to spend and share a little bit of thoughts and also learn during this process as well. I make a joke sometimes that we probably used the term pilot or prototype more in the last 3 years or 2 years than we had in the previous 176 years that Westfield's been around, when we've been around since 170 years. And so there is a difficult. I think one thing is the pilots are super necessary. The prototypes are super necessary. So much of the time that we have spent over the last couple of years has been on, I use the analogy of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. We've been selling inside of our organization the idea of what generative AI can do. And I think part of that is building prototypes, building pilots to share and sell the idea of the art of the possible. And so people can see it because they hear about it. They haven't really touched it. They're not really sure what it is. And you got to give people an opportunity to be able to say, okay, what is this thing? How would this actually impact our business? So first thing is, I think those are super necessary. For me, the biggest part of going from pilotitis, if you will, going from that into production is there's got to be some top-down support. So the top-down support becomes super important because a lot of the things that we've been doing is more at the grassroots level and selling up. But at some point, you've got to have that top-down pressure. We have to go, here's what we want. And we want that rock to be pulled up the hill by the business versus it being pushed by IT or the people building those prototypes. And so I think through that process of building the prototypes and the process to show people, here's what's possible, then you've got to gain that top-down pressure. On the side of that, you mentioned governance. Obviously, governance is super key to that as well, because unless you have some people in the organization going, yep, this is the right thing for the organization, how do we continue to, how do we control the risk or mitigate the risk that may be associated with letting an agent doing something, letting some automation happen? Maybe there's probably less human in the loop that maybe some people would like. Having that check next to it, I think that governance piece is super important as well. So putting together some type of governance process with legal involved, with InfoSec involved, some operations people in the business to be able to say, yeah, we accept some of the risk that is associated with generative AI is helpful to provide some guardrails for what that looks like. Ultimately, it's about delivering things and shipping things. I work in IT. There's probably a lot of people on here that work on IT. It's about shipping things and learning and figuring out how it works and how it didn't work. There'll be some bumps along the way, and we've had our bumps and things that fail. But I think getting those things shipped is a way for us to build that muscle around innovation overall.
Okay. Great way to get us started. Thank you, Don. I had a follow-up comment, a short question, and a longer question for you. So I'll get through these real quick. First off, I heard you say about getting the business involved. I always say, make sure you get the business involved early and often. Um, and I think that's one of the things in terms of scaling beyond pilots, is making sure they understand the business value of that. So I appreciate you saying that. My short question is, as you were describing how you move forward, I notice it's not a technology issue. Is that a fair statement? Typically, it's not a technology issue.
Yeah, and I think the technology is becoming less and less of an issue as we kind of go forward because the technology is so powerful.
Yeah.
And it is going to be so transformational. I try to continue to push our business to for us to be business led. Like at the end of the day, we're not doing IT just for IT. We're doing IT in order to provide some type of value to the business. And we need them to be our articulate. Here's the outcomes we're looking for in IT, technology part of that, process part of that, people part of that. All of us have a way to be able to solve for those business outcomes. And maybe it's generative AI and maybe it's not. And so let's be open to, just because we have a hammer, not everything's a nail kind of approach either. But I think the business led that's what's sustainable. It's not sustainable if it just continues to be the IT person who's trying to push that rock up the hill.
Okay. Good. That's important, I think, because we do look at technology and sometimes become enamored with the technology. Let me ask you one more question, because I do want to get to other panelists, but I love when I hear people talk about the art of the possible. That really kind of projects a vision, and this is where we're going, and you can kind of almost backwards plan from the art of the possible. When you talk about the art of the possible with your stakeholders and your executives, a question that I often ask, having been involved in a lot of these different technology implementations and initiatives, is how do you go from art of the possible to having believers? Are there proof points? Is there something you communicate effectively that really helps with that? How would you get to that believer status with your vision?
Well, I think it's having people that are on the team that really do understand the business and can articulate what the business outcomes they're looking for are. And I think it's meeting them where they're at, because it's going to be really hard for them to come meet us where we're at. So we have to go out and be able to figure out what are they really trying to solve and what are their pain points. One of the things that I think us and myself and IT, who's been in IT for over 25 years, is we've done a great job over that 25-year period of training the business to be able to say, whenever you ask for something from IT and and you think it's going to be transformational, one, it's going to be 5+ years and it's going to have a lot of zeros behind it.
Right.
This- I think this technology is different because I think the technology that generative AI allows it to be, one, a little less zeros and a lot less time, and for us to be able to provide something for them. So I think there's a little bit of, I still don't believe you. Like, I feel like I got to go to the board, or I got to go to, multiple levels of my bosses to get some ideas sold. And it's like, well, maybe not. And is there a way to be able to do that? So I think there's an untraining of the business for them to go, no, ask us for those things that you think are really, really hard. And let's figure a different way out to solve them, because we have capabilities to be able to solve those that are much different than they were even 3 years ago.
That's great. All right. Thank you, Don. We're going to come back to you, but first, I want to introduce our second panelist, Govind Srinivasan, who is an enterprise technology and digital transformation leader with over 20 years of experience advancing data, AI, and cloud modernization in regulated utilities. In his current role as Director of Platform and Architecture, Data and AI at PPL Corporation, he leads the enterprise data and AI platform, enabling secure, scalable, and compliant analytics and AI capabilities across the utility value chain. His work focuses on aligning AI strategy, data, platform modernization, grid transformation, and regulatory priorities to help move from siloed automation to orchestrated, platform-led AI that strengthens operational resilience and delivers measurable business value. I love that you have both siloed and orchestrated in your bio, Govind, because those are two things that come up a lot in this space. So I want to kick off our discussion with you by talking about matching AI approaches to utility challenges. This is something where, like any business, there's limited resources. There's a lot of folks who think that their use cases need to be at the top of the list. But I think this idea of matching AI approaches to utility challenges sounds great, but like many things, the devil is probably in the details. So, how are you working with your colleagues, the executives, your peers at PPL in terms of setting those priorities when you may have the VP of grid operations wanting to do a volt var optimization thing and he wants all your time on that? The VP of customer care may be saying, we have customer data everywhere and we can't do anything with it. You got to help us because we want to do A, B, and C. So tell us a little bit about how you all set those priorities in a world of kind of restrained resources, but you have to get things done. How do you go about that?
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. I'll start off saying probably the same across all enterprises at PPL. AI priorities start with the business outcomes, not technology, and that's especially important in a regulated utility environment. We in PPL, we are like value streams way of working. We have customer value stream, grid and field operations, and enterprise and regulatory work, while we keep the reliability, safety, and trust front and center. If an AI use case doesn't clearly improve one of these outcomes, it just doesn't move forward. We manage AI as an enterprise portfolio, not collection of pilots. So through our AI Center of Excellence, ideas come through a common intake and governance model, but delivery happens in the hub and spoke structure, with business teams owning the outcomes and the central teams providing platforms, guardrails, and reusable capabilities. That allows leadership to compare investments across the enterprise and direct resources where AI can scale and not just succeed once. I should also mention that at PPL, we are very intentional about where we invest first. A good portion of our AI funding goes into the data foundations, platforms, and responsible AI controls, because orchestration only works when data is trusted, governed, and is clear. The solutions can be reused across the functions. So that's what enables us to move beyond task automation towards end-to-end agent-enabled processes, then span people, systems, and decisions. So in short, automation gives us the efficiency, but orchestration is how people leadership thinks about long-term value, scale, and transformation with AI.
That's great. I like the way you described orchestration because we're starting to hear it more and more, and I think it's important. I want to go back to, I tried to capture it. I think I missed part of it because I had a follow-up question around this. You said there was certain, if an AI proposed initiative doesn't meet certain business criteria, was it safety, reliability, and what else was it? If it does not moving the needle on one of those areas, it doesn't even get on the table.
The trust, safety, reliability, and trust are the front and center.
Okay. So when you're looking at that, I picture that and I picture you have a list of AI to-dos, right? Everyone has their own. And then you have safety, reliability, and trust. Do you have almost a scorecard approach to how do you manage that? Because, maybe they all address reliability, but some do better than others, So how do you flesh that out?
So we start off, like I mentioned, with the enterprise value stream ways of working. We start off partnering with the business. So internally, we have our business prioritization to say what set of effort that we pick up or initiatives that we pick up. And we start off with having a high level scoring across what does it touch upon, right? It could be across reliability, it could be across safety, could be across governance and compliance specific. So we do have an internal scorecard to rank across all of these. And then that's what we intentionally prioritize as we get into the phases of the project.
Good. Okay. That's helpful because I love the sound of safety, reliability, and trust, but then I'm picturing how you execute that. So that's great. I'd love to learn more about that sometime. By the way, I do see we have questions coming in from the audience. We are going to get to those in just a minute, so please keep sending them in, and we'll get to them. But I do want to introduce our third speaker, who's batting cleanup for us today. Joe Hours leads Centric Consulting's AI solutions practice, where he bridges the gap between technological possibility and business reality. He helps organizations implement responsible AI practices that drive meaningful business value, not just by adopting technology, but by transforming how work gets done. Joseph is a nationally recognized AI thought leader who writes for Forbes, contributes to the Harvard Business Review and other major publications, and speak at industry events across the country on AI strategy, governance, and implementation. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. We are definitely going to tap into your expertise today. I do want to open up with a question for you, kind of following up from what we talked about with Govind about this aligning the AI approaches to the utility challenges, because there's a lot of competing priorities. So I think one of the beauties of having someone with your background on a discussion like this is you look across different vertical industries, and there may be lessons learned, best practices, things that you see being done well that can be applied. So when you're working with, listening to centric clients across different industries, how are they setting priorities across different models, tools, autonomous agents that would be insightful for utility leaders? Is there a method to the madness, I guess, is part of that question in terms of what you're seeing? Because the technology is coming at us so fast. I think the last 6 months, it's been crazy. I've read some statistics about AI capabilities from 6 months ago to today. I'm sure you know that all too well. So how are leaders in other organizations or even utilities you're working with, how are they making those decisions, particularly as it relates to different models and tools and agents and the things that are happening now?
That's a great question. And thank you for having me here today. And thank you everybody for your time. It's a great question, but I'm going to back up a little bit on some of this, because there are what are people doing, and then there are what are successful people doing, because there is a little bit of a difference there. But first, you made mention of the capabilities that we've had over the past 6 months. The reality is we've been doubling in capability roughly every 4 to 6 months. I come from a technology background. I'm used to the application of Moore's law, whereas being across the board of, technology doubles capability roughly every 18 months or so, which is interesting when you start to think about it. If we go back to that sort of 18-month cycle, you can go 2 to 3 generations of a technology, and still be somewhat, relevant. And that's how we sort of get to these 5 to 7 year core strategic upgrade, core strategic project replacement cycles, because you're about that third generation behind at that point, and you don't want to be fourth, fifth, or sixth generation behind. That same sort of logic applies to AI, and it sort of shapes how we have to approach AI. If we're doubling the capabilities every 4 to 6 months, it means that we need to be on replacement cycles that are 18 months long. And I'm sure that's going to make people's heads explode. It's not quite as higher as it sounds. Very different to swap out a billing system versus an agent system. But when it comes to what are the best tools, what are the best models, what are the best platforms, what are the best frameworks to use from an AI perspective, it is going to come down to whatever you implement, you need to give yourself an exit ramp for switching. You need to be part of your solution focus needs to be low switching cost for the next best thing. And with that, we need to focus on getting the 80% of good enough to capture value now and not wait for 100% of perfection that will never come. I often use the gold mining analogy here. If you go back, right, 1849, the big gold rush, right? Gold miners were out there mining gold. They didn't wait till they could catch every little flake, every minuscule amount of gold to capture value. They captured what they could with the tools and capabilities they had at the time. And then as we've evolved in technology, we've gone back and remined that ground to capture that value that was left behind. Because if you wait, you will have missed them capturing and leveraging that value in the meantime. So there's that element of it. Coming back to what are people doing and what are successful people doing, I think it's important to understand is most people are sort of checking a box saying, yes, we've implemented a tool, we bought our Copilot licenses, we've deployed it to our teams, we've got some teams doing experiments. So Don, I think you called it Pythonitis. We got some proof of concepts going on here, and they'll check a box and say, we're doing AI. That's not really doing AI. What it really is enabling the organization to do what I call experiential learning, which is we're going to learn through some experiences. The challenge is those experiences and learning, they're important. They're great for what we need, but they don't scale to a production setting. And so we need to acknowledge them for what they are. They are learning opportunity. They're not necessarily a scaling opportunity. So then it comes back to the fundamentals, and Govind and Don already both said this, which is, well, what do we do? Well, first you have to align to those business outcomes. And for every organization, your business outcome might be a little different. It might be revenue, it might be customer stickiness, it might be brand recognition or boxing out a competitor. Whatever that business outcome that you're trying to achieve, that's what you need to focus on first, and then work backwards and say, what's the right tool? Because the tool will change based on the outcome that you're trying to get. If you're trying to improve load forecasting or outage prediction, you're going to want to get into the world of predictive models. If you want to look at individual back office productivity, you might start looking at individual worker productivity tools, or you might start to pivot into agents where you can start orchestrating, large processes. But you need to start with the business problem first, and then work into, well, how does AI help solve this problem? And therein lies a little bit of a problem, because from a leadership perspective, not everybody is fluent in the speak of AI, if you will. Not everybody understands the difference between a predictive model and predictive analytics. Not everybody understands the difference between an orchestrated agent solution versus an agent platform, or even within there, the different types of agents and what that means for a business problem. And so those things impact your ability to leverage the technology effectively. And this is why what we're seeing right now is, 80% of organizations are doing AI across the board. So I think the slide you said earlier, 100% of utilities across the board, 80% of organizations are doing some form of AI. Of those, less than a third actually have production scale systems. All right. And the reason is because those individual pilots, those use cases, they're great for learning when you have limited input, you have limited things that you're trying to do, but when you expose it to the real world, you have infinite number of edge cases that you hadn't even conceived of, and have it accounted for in the solution, and the ROI diminishes, right? What looks great on a desktop fails in a distributed environment. And so you really have to look at this holistically when you're putting these solutions together, which brings me to a key point that I'm sure I'll hammer home many times here. If your strategy to leveraging AI is to say, do pilots and do experiments, and whatever works, we'll pursue, that's actually the wrong approach. The approach you need to take is, this is a dedicated investment. This is a dedicated thing that we're going to do with intense focus, as Don said, from the top down. It's got to have that top-down visibility. You can't wait for the great ideas to come from the bottom up. There's too much in organizational inertia, too much bureaucracy that filters what's actually being done, learned, and achieved, that makes it impossible to scale those things. And so those are some things that I would just put in the back of people's mind as you start thinking about this. Is think about this as an opportunity to transform your business, re-envision how you would deliver your goods and services across your value streams, and then say, where are our business problems? What are we trying to solve? How can we leverage AI to solve it? And by the way, in asking that question, you always need to make sure, are we using the right tool? Because sometimes the right tool is not AI. And I'll say many times it's not AI. I can't tell you how many use case workflows I do for clients, and they're like, hey, we got all these use cases. And a good 2/3 of them are traditional use cases. They're just, RPA opportunities, or they're, process redesign, or training, or people and change sort of, opportunities. Not everything requires AI, but AI will touch everything that we do.
Great.
Hey,
What?
Mike, if I could just jump
A
in
lot
on that.
there. Yeah, please, Don, jump in.
I think, Joe's first kind of couple paragraphs really hit a nerve, with a good nerve with me, because I think the time horizons that we've been working under, of the 5-year to 7-year, are becoming way shorter. I totally agree with that. And I have one specific example of how we saw that kind of play out last year. The business was saying, hey, in insurance, when we write small business insurance, for instance, and it's Joe's Pizza Shop has an NAIC code that's associated with it that says it's this type of business, and they would use that code in order to help figure out what the rate is for that. So Joe's Pizza business is going to have a different one than Lloyd's Flower Shop or somebody else's, um, auto muffler detailing shop. They all have their different ones. We found that we were looking at vendors last year about this time, and the business was looking and saying, hey, here's a vendor we're going to choose. Well, we kind of came late in the game. Our team said, hey, we think we could actually beat the vendor on that. Give us a chance to go beat the vendor because we think generative AI can provide that functionality without having used the vendor. At the end of the day, we were too late to the game. The ship was kind of sailed, but we said, hold on, only sign a 1-year deal because it's going to cost you X dollars to go do that. We think we can provide the solution of X minus Y and sign a 1-year deal. And by the end of that next year, we're going to be able to, our internal solution is going to be able to replace that. So it's kind of a rent situation. We think about buy and build as our only two options. This was kind of a rent option that we had. It says, go rent that for a year, but let us go build something that's way cheaper and actually way more accurate than what the vendor would be able to provide. So that horizon, some people would go, no, I'm going to sign the longest contract I can because it's going to give me the most buying power, but actually signing a shorter contract for us to then be able to come in and go, no, we're going to replace that at a smaller amount. Some people are going, I'm tired of talking about business classification. We just talked about that last year. I think it hits on Joe's point around those timing horizons become a lot shorter and things become almost disposable, or we're renting different solutions and having an architecture that allows you to plug and play and unplug and plug something in. This becomes even more important in today's day and age than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, great example. And on that same theme around these technology cycles, Joe, when I first got into the utility industry 36 years ago, was studying SCADA systems in that market. And we knew that the major utilities, any utility with 1 million plus customers, for instance, they were going to replace their SCADA system every 9 to 11 years. That we just knew that there was a pattern established. Now in the 90s, all of a sudden that started to change, of course, and now it's even more different. But when you talk about an 18-month technology cycle, holy cow, and that may even get shorter the way things are going right now. But one of the things you said as a result of these shorter technology cycles is to have low cost exit ramps where you have to be 80% good and not 100% perfect. I love the sound of that, but I want to dig into that a little bit. What does that look like when you talk about a low cost exit ramp? Is it revisiting what's your cloud infrastructure look like? Is it what use cases, what technologies, what enabling technologies are you using? Speak a little bit to what that looks like in a kind of a more kind of on the ground kind of a way.
Yeah. So it looks like a couple of things. So one, Don's example of sort of renting capability, and then reevaluating in a short period of time. That's a great example of seeing that in action. But to make that happen, you have to start factoring other things into account. So when you're selecting platforms or tools, especially in the generative AI space, we run this. There's an online meme about running a circle like, OpenAI makes an announcement, then Claude makes an announcement, then Gemini makes an announcement, then OpenAI makes an announcement, then Claude, then Gemini, right? It's this cat and mouse. And so all of these are great, models, but they have different capabilities. They're a little better at some things than others. And so the ability to like swap models, in and out without changing the core platform that you're using is an example of the low switching costs. Making sure your data is your data, and not necessarily moved into a proprietary format of a vendor. There are SaaS providers out there that will have these obscure data models behind the scenes that make it difficult to get your data out. It's easy to get it in, but it's hard to get it back out. That creates a high barrier of switching costs. So when you're evaluating platform providers, you have to start asking those questions about how difficult it is for me to get my data back out to move it to a different model, or a different platform. Those types of questions are the ones that make that actionable, sort of on the ground there. And then not locking yourself into, long-term contracts. I don't know if you guys, been watching the news with the SaaS apocalypse, right? But as we have these new capabilities, we're seeing entire sectors of, tech industries be, rocketed really by blog post. Um, and it's really because everybody is nervous about how disruptive AI is going to be. And by the way, I am unapologetic about saying that AI is 100% disruptive. And I put this on the order of the Industrial Revolution to agricultural society in terms of how disruptive this is going to be. We're going to see transitions in jobs. We're going to see new opportunities. I do believe in the positive growth upside that there will be more jobs created than displaced by AI. And so I think that's important, to understand. But what are those new jobs? Well, they're going to be determined by the new goods and services that we come up with, our new delivery models that we come up with. And so we've got to remain adaptable, nimble, flexible, agile, all of those terms that we hate to hear. Um, but in practice, we actually have to be able to do that. So ask yourself this question, right? Most organizations do a business continuity or disaster recovery task, like once a year, right? If we had to fail over all of our IT systems somewhere, we'll test that like once a year. And can we do it? I would encourage you to ask your question. If we had to switch a platform in 3 months, could we do it? And ask yourself, if you can't, why not? I'm not saying that you have to make a change as a result of that, but that simple tabletop exercise will tell you, where do we have friction with being able to capitalize on technology to leverage it for our business? Because you may realize that through a blog post that comes out 6 months from now, that your industry gets rocked. And how are you going to be able to respond? Well, if you don't even know what it takes to pivot from one platform to another in your own organization, you're not going to be able to respond to the market in a timely fashion. Now, for most organizations, there's parity in the industry. So it's not necessarily about being first, but about not being last. But that's not a great feeling from a leadership perspective. At least by having the thought experiment, you'll be in a better position to go, what's our response? And I mean, I call it tabletop exercise, right? Because we do those for like incident, response planning. But a market shock is an incident in and of itself. It's just not like an IT sort of related incident. But it is an important exercise for folks to do, and that will help you identify where those switching costs are high in your organization.
Okay. I love the 3-month challenge as a thought and tabletop exercise. That's great. We do continue to get questions in from the audience, and some are for the panel and some are for more specific panelists. So I'm going to go to one of these here. Govind, this is for you. So heads up, here it comes. It says, how has the attitude towards using AI changed within PPL over the last few years? Is there more willingness to try AI pilots and demos among the engineering teams or only among the executive leadership? So I think, yeah, how is that changing maybe the culture even in terms of the openness? And is it more of an executive curiosity versus the engineering and the operations folks actually executing on some of this? What does that look like at PPL?
I would say attitude towards AI people has shifted significantly over the last few years. It started off with cautious experimentation, driven significantly by leadership, to like a broad base, like engagement across engineering, operations, and business teams over time. It's the executive led, risk aware. When we started off with is establishing governance and security guardrails, like identifying if high value pilots and essentially avoiding any disruption to reliability and critical systems, right? So the early pilots were in the analytics space, in forecasting and productivity tools. Where we really hit the inflection point is when we set up the AI Center of Excellence, where we started seeing visible wins. I may have touched upon this earlier, is the AICOE has a very clear intake path for AI ideas and shared toolings and best practices. So this started giving us like visible wins in the space of uh, customer digital agent, co-pilot adoption, AI-assisted regulatory workflows, and in many other tangible areas. So today we are um, um, looking at engagements both top down and bottom up, right? So both the engineering and the operations led experimentation examples I would give across all the three use cases, like what I mentioned earlier. So the where we are right now is our engineers are more willing to experiment. They're more willing to, because they have clearer boundaries. They have much lower risk in the entry points, especially with the productivity tools, copilots, and others. And the COE significantly enables rather than pushing or forcing for an adoption.
Say a little bit more about, if you could, when an engineer or a group of engineers, I think if I caught this right, you said they would have less risk than maybe if it was higher. Was that because it's not an enterprise thing? It's just very specific point solution that they may be messing with, or a very limited data set? How does that fit into how you evaluate the risk?
Yeah. So when I said like engineers have like a flexibility, what I meant to say was more around the AI demand flows through multiple channels, including like engineering initiated requests and cross-functional innovation. So, for example, like the field, grid, and enterprise teams, they actively propose agentic and AI-assisted use cases, and many are initiated by engineers and operators that are more closer to the work area.
Sure.
So, to address some of those, the AI COE portfolio, they have like go through the um, identification and approve, if I may, the use cases with the demand accelerating across all the value streams. It's not just the leadership mandates. It's also more from what exactly happens in the field. That's what I meant.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's go to another audience question. That I think this one's for the whole panel. So I'm going to open this up to the panel. An interesting one. Is it better to develop AI solutions from scratch, i.e., maybe your own tool, open source tools, et cetera, or to check whether an AI SaaS, software as a service product, is available to implement the solution? So build or buy, right? Don, I think I heard you use that term already. So how do you all see that? And maybe some instances it's best to build it internally. Other cases, hey, I just got from this conference and demoed this really cool new AI application, and we're going to buy it and use it. So what does that look like for you all? And I'll just open it up. Whoever wants to go first, please jump in.
I'm happy to go first on that one. That's a great one. It's one that is plaguing every single industry. It's not just a utility question. And here's what's interesting. I'm going to lay some background here as to why it's unfolded this way, and then I'll jump into my answer here. Language models are actually trained on language. And one of the reasons that programming languages, coding, has been really, really sort of adopting, experimenting, exploring, and then sort of eroded away by language models is because programming languages are a language. It's a structured language. And in fact, in many cases, it's easier to understand programming language than it is to understand, English. But what that has done is that has made us very capable of building stuff very, very quickly, and that changes the buy versus build calculus. The ability to build migration adapters so that you can switch from one place to another in weeks as opposed to months, or building entire new platforms in a relatively short period of time. We don't have to spend 5 years building a product, if you will, when it can be built in a fraction of the time. We do this a lot of times for our clients, where we'll modernize legacy applications, and we'll take 30,000 lines of code and rewrite it in a new modern tech stack, new modern architectures in a very short period of time, hitting 10 to 20 times productivity of what it would take a normal team to do. Because you can move extremely fast with these tools today, it has absolutely flipped that calculus. And then when you factor in, well, is this platform going to be relevant in 6 months? It really makes you scratch your head about, buying somebody actually might seem a little riskier if I can build in the same amount of time that it takes me to integrate into this new platform. And so that's the fundamental crux. So the answer isn't pick one or the other. The answer is make sure you're evaluating both in light of this new world. and don't shortcut yourself by looking at the way we approached it prior to the launch of generative AI a couple of years ago. You have to reevaluate your scoring criteria on what's important today, and then make a decision there. So again, I'm not going to say one versus the other is good or bad, but it is a different evaluation today.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think spot on, Joe. I think I think when we thought about build versus buy at some point, that it's becoming much more viable for us to be able to build things. Now everybody's organization is different, right? So you also have to think about, can you support it? Do you have the skill set? How readily the skill set? If you have a small shop and 2 people leave, what's the risk associated with that? Is it going to be maintainable? All of those kind of things. But I think the speed at which you can do some things today, um, is much more viable than it was in the future or in the past. I think your point around, is the software or the vendor we're working with going to be around in 5 years? Are they going to be like, a lot of these things are going to become commodities, and some of these places aren't going to exist. The other piece is, some of the vendors and what they're presenting is actually on 2024 technology. And so they're behind the cycle a little bit. I was in with a large vendor that we use within the insurance that almost everybody uses, and it was about 6 months ago. And I was like, "Well, like, how are you taking advantage of this, this, and this?" They're like, "Oh, well, that's on our roadmap. We're probably a year out from that." And I'm like, "Well, that's what we're thinking about right now. I don't want the 2024 stuff. I want the stuff that's in 2025." And that cycle is putting pressure on some of those providers to be able uh, to get to be more nimble in their approach, because they're going through some of that thrashing as well.
Everybody's struggling to keep up, I think. I had a follow-up question for you, Don. You said, paraphrasing, it's more viable today to build rather than buy in many use cases. Why is it more so the case today that you can build? Is it the tools are better, your staff's trained up more? What just to maybe add a little color to that.
Yeah, I think the tools are way better. I mean, Joe's point around, the cycle of doubling capability is shortening to the point where I think the tools are up way better. I think they're easier to work with as well. And so I think some people, using natural language in order to be able to build applications or build different things. We've got some experiments we're doing here of modernizing some of our platforms. Again, 25-year-old platforms. And we're seeing some success with that. We're also seeing some success with generative AI actually taking the requirements, the specs, and actually having access to the code base in order to make the code change in a more rapid way than a human's able to do that. And so just by working and talking with using natural language in order to ask for what you want, if it has access to the code base, it makes it much more easier to be able to do some of those things. So I just think it's much more viable than it was because of those two things. And it just keeps getting better and better. I mean, we're a month or two away from another step function based on what we had in January.
Yeah, I'll add on to what Daniel was saying, right? So that's where the fastest time to value is. So I'll pick a relevant PPL's example. In our case, our customer engagement leverages like AI-enabled SaaS platform. Customer contact center as a service or digital agents, they are like SaaS solutions. That why we pick some of those is um, these platforms already solve key capabilities like speech to text and intent detection, authentication and authorization, channel routing. They come with a lot of security and scalability and compliance baked in it. So our efforts focus more on integration and orchestration, and not necessarily the natural language plumbing side of things. So this is a classic use case where we buy and orchestrate. An example of like a SaaS copilots, if I may, is a productivity and a knowledge AI tool. This capability isn't very unique to PPL, and in this case, the the risk is more procedural and not operational. Areas where we build or extend are things like within PPL, it's the regulatory and rate case agents. That's a good example of um, uh, how we do not just rely on the uh, off the shelf SaaS or regulatory workflows. Instead, we go in and do agentic orchestration on top of the foundational patterns. So the agents do gathering and summarizing and draft responses, and then the humans approve and submit on top. So that's across multiple areas. So I would summarize that we buy AI capabilities, but then we own the orchestration, governance, and the accountability.
Okay. Yeah. I think you mentioned the regulatory space and rate cases and how AI is being used there. I think that's just that changes everything in terms of what a utilities regulatory staff can do. We used to take weeks, takes hours, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's exciting stuff. I do want to stick with our audience because they're asking a lot of really good questions. I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping track of them here. I'm going to ask one, and I think this is a really good one for this panel because this really gets into some of the deep AI stuff that I think as an industry we're maybe struggling with a little bit. So I'll just read you the precursor and then the actual question. As we move from automation to complex orchestration, we are essentially deploying agentic AI across critical infrastructure. True. Does the panel believe software-defined zero trust is enough, or do we need hardware-enforced boundaries like a physical hardware isolation layer to prevent agentic drift from causing a kinetic failure on the grid? So it's a grid question, but I think it's relevant to other industries as well in terms of the zero trust idea and how do you get there? Is it software? Is it hardware? What does that look like? And since it finishes with asking about a kinetic failure on the grid, Govind, I'm going to start with you, but I would love to hear from Joe and Don also in terms of the zero trust issue, be it software or is hardware needed?
Yeah, let me start off with saying the zero trust software controls are necessary, but they're not sufficient on their own for an agentic system that touch, especially the grid operations, right? So we design for more of a layered containment, like a software-defined zero trust, but then very strict human in the loop or physical or logical isolation between AI and systems that are capable of these actions, right? So to start off with, if zero trust is the baseline where you have a stronger identity and authentication for agents, less privilege access to tools and explicit authorization, if some of those are the zero trust, then you move towards more human in the loop for managing risks like change protection settings. The crew dispatch is a good example. And then impact for the grid stability, where agents essentially access like more um, advisory role, like orchestrative role. They suggest about what to prioritize and help us prepare for actions. But an operator must approve those executions. So that helps us with the very clear management side of things.
Okay, Joe or Don, do you have anything to add to that in terms of that zero trust software versus having a hardware layer, et cetera?
I mean, Don, I don't know if you wanted to go, but I'm happy to go first on it. So I think the answer is going to be you need both. I am not the utility, hardware expert, but I think about this in terms of what other critical operations do organizations have. But if you have, agentic drift, and I want to be clear, agentic drift is really when agents do something outside the expectations that you expect them to do, which is very different than model drift that might be in other in the data science world of predictive modeling and machine learning models. But you're definitely going to want a software zero trust sort of approach, right? So definitely agents should be sandboxed. They should only have permissions that they should have to, whitelisting. They should not have access to perform destructive actions by design. Um, the one thing when people implement agentic solutions, and this doesn't address all of the thing that we're talking about here, but this is super, super critical. I cannot tell you how many agentic solutions I see fail because you do not give the agents an off ramp. And what I mean by that is if it tries to perform an action and it can't, if you don't tell it what to do when it fails to achieve something on the first time, it will keep trying and it will try and find workarounds because when you say, I need you to complete this task, behind the scenes, mathematically, it's optimized to complete that task, which means it has a set condition it's trying to achieve, and it will work whatever it can to get there. And that's where you see that sort of drip. But if the answer to a task can be successful completion or successful escalation, now you've given it a way out before it starts to engage in that round and about behavior that you see in all the research. So that's one of the things we call that sort of the cite or pause portion of zero trust, right? If an agent can't perform an action, have it escalate, have it state why it can't, let the human take over from that point of view. And then, of course, always leave footprints, right? Audit everything, track everything that the agent does. So that's great at the software layer, right? But when we start talking about either critical financial transactions as an example, or, something like, the grid, I do think you're going to want to have hardware boundaries. The interesting thing about agents is agents are inherently unreliable, but people are inherently unreliable too. And you can make them more reliable together. But it doesn't happen out of the box. It does require training. It does require, experience working with these systems to do so. As Govind says, right? Agents can provide you the input and human takes the action. I think that's the right entry level to go. There is a maturity progression when you start implementing agent solutions where you do human in the loop at every step, then you do human on the loop reviewing things, and then you do human outside the loop reviewing outcomes. There is a maturity progression, and not every application that you have is properly suited for that human outside the loop sort of approach. And so it's about picking when and where do we deploy these systems? How much control do we need to have in the process versus after the process? That'll help you sort of shape what your answer needs to be for that question.
A lot. Thank you.
Sorry.
Do you have anything to add? No, that's good. It's a tough question. You good, Don?
I'm good. Yep, good on that.
Okay. All right. More from the audience. This one is around asset management, but I think there's going to be several different pieces to this one. So, all right. Where does AI offer the greatest opportunity for improvement in asset performance management workflow? In other words, data collection, data cleaning, gap filling, benchmarking, analytics, business case, scenario planning. So asset performance management, of course, is an art and a science unto itself. But as utilities become much richer in data and availability of data, I think there's a lot of interesting new developments around that. So getting back to the core question, where does AI offer the greatest opportunity for improvement in these asset performance management workflows? I'll open it up to the floor. Govind, obviously utilities are very asset rich. So I'm sure that this is something that you touch on probably a daily basis, but I'd love to hear from other panelists as well.
Yeah. What I'll say is the greatest AI leverage in the APM is the asset performance management. It's not in the predictive models themselves. It's the upstream and the downstream, the data quality, the gap filling, cross system context and orchestration, all of that, right? So the analytics side of it matters, but then the where we realize value is the data collection part of it. It could be like to kick us off, right? So the EAM, SCADA, AMI, protection systems, there are so many other systems from where we need to bring in like the field data, telemetry data, have to bring in asset attributes. So all of these,
Even weather data,
yeah, exactly, right. So when AI is used to more correlate like an outage management system to an ADMS, right, with the asset history. So quite a bit of like collection and context building is important. And then I would touch the the data cleaning and the gap filling and the validation side of things is to bring in addressing some of the inconsistencies with the attributes, asset attributes, and some examples like in the meter to field, where the AI can be purposed towards flagging for data anomalies that would otherwise make the use case a less trustable, right? So in the asset health space, like the usage is more understanding of how to detect asset miscoordination and degradation areas, and then the maintenance prioritization. So largely, all of this data is purpose for let's say benchmarking, risk scoring. Those are the areas that within PPL how we purpose.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And there's that prioritization coming up again. That's always going to be with us. I'm sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on this question a little bit because I think this is an opportunity to sort of think about how do you re-envision the value stream from an AI perspective? Because the question is posed as a very spot-oriented approach, which is, hey, if these are four things, right? Which one of these does AI perform best at? And so I don't know that that's necessarily the right way to think about it. So when it comes to like data collection, right? AI is largely ineffective here because we're already streaming data from IoT devices. That's not new. There's not much value AI can add. Data cleaning, gap filling. AI is already quietly doing this stuff. Everything from anomaly detection through synthetic data creation for gaps and scenarios, et cetera, normalizing values across manufacturing devices. That's already taking place. When it comes to predictive analytics and benchmarking, there are lots of mature models in this space. That's not breaking new ground. When it comes to business case and scenario planning, it does get a little more, interesting. But I think the value isn't in AI being applied to one individual step. It's AI reducing the gaps between the steps, collapsing that process down. So instead of an agent for data collection, what if you had an agent that could tap into that data collection, could identify those anomalies, compare it against benchmark, and automatically generate those scenarios and use cases for you and eliminate the white space between the steps? That's when you start to rethink that process. And again, if I said that out of order or wrong, I apologize. I'm not a utility expert. But when I hear that and see that, like that's what goes through my mind is, well, let's flip this around. Let's not solve the individual problem. Let's solve the entirety of the problem and then see how AI could help do that. And I think it's really in consolidating, eliminating steps, not applying AI at each individual step.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think we probably made the type of instead of process redefinition or inserting generative AI into the existing manual process or into the existing 5-step process all along the way, we really flipped our script about probably about a year ago where we said, what's the output that we want? Like, what are we trying to get to? And let's reimagine. I think, Joe, you even used that word, reimagine the process that says, here's what we're trying to achieve. Let's figure out how generative AI potentially can solve for that outcome that we're trying to get. Because, generative AI is pretty powerful, but it's really hard in order to insert it into all the five different steps of whatever that process is. And we've tried that, and we've got some things that are in production today that are doing that. And the way we found that it was really, really hard. But the problem is the humans get in the way because we kind of say, well, this is the process that we built. And guess what? That process is optimized to a certain level today. You should have saw it 5 years ago. You should have saw it 10 years ago. This is a really good tight process. And it's like, okay, now I'm calling that person's baby ugly when I come in and go, well, is there a different way for us to go solve this? And they're like, we don't even know what you're talking about. So I think that reimagining the process instead of going, let's try this piece and this piece and this piece. I've got a great example of one of our senior executives for our middle market team that he wanted to solve for this little, like he's like, when we're out in the field, sometimes we need to be able to calculate the square footage, the cost by square footage. And I was like, okay, great. Well, what are you trying to solve? He's like, well, I'm trying to solve, how do I understand the cost per square footage? I'm like, you want a calculator? He's like, yeah, that would be great. And my team was like, we're not freaking doing that, right? Like, we're not solving that problem. I said, no, we're not solving that problem. But it was like the mindset of, this is the one step of the process that I know needs fixed. And we kind of had to step back and go, let's think about the whole thing. There's an art to be able to sell that idea without losing the audience.
Right.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I was just going to add on that. I think an often overlooked thing is processes are optimized for the organizations that support them. And I'll even go to say that data is optimized for the organizations to support it. So siloed organizations lead to siloed processes and siloed data. So taking that step back and going, okay, well, it might be optimized for how we are today, and it actually might be optimized for human involvement because we only had humans to do the job. But the future might not be humans involved in the same way. So we have to re-optimize and rethink what that means. And, I know from a consultant, the word transformative is, probably, people are like, just go sit down and shut up. Um, this event, right? AI itself is going to lead to transformation. It's going to cause people to think this way, and people will do this whether they call it a transformation or not. I know what's going to happen, but I think it's important to say, you know what? There are no sacred rules when we're doing a thought exercise and trying to re-envision what does our future look like. Put everything on the table. Just because we do it that way today doesn't mean it's the way we have to do it tomorrow. And I think, Don, your point 100% on that, right? You got to rethink it and ask yourself, well, why are we doing it this way? If somebody says, well, we got to do it this way, it's great, it's optimized, it works well. Okay, but why does it have to be that way, right? We're not saying that it's bad. We want to understand why it exists so that we can make decision if it should continue to exist, or if there is latitude to consider alternatives.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to what Joe and Don said. Early in my career, I remember we were looking at a lot of the field operations in a utility, dealing with GIS and how you update records and get the work done in the field. And one of the things that we would say, and one of the things we learned was, if you're just automating a manual process, you're missing a lot of the value. In other words, if you're not really stepping back, as you all are suggesting, and looking at that process, where can we improve it, make it more efficient, more effective? And of course, in utilities, safer, but there's also an element of speed and efficiency to that as well. And what I'm hearing is AI is an opportunity to really do that. We're not just going to automate a process; we're going to completely rethink this. And I think that's an important data point for us to be as we lean into this. Excuse me. I got another one from the audience here. So let me just read through it. I want to see where we go with this. For generative AI to truly add value into an organization, the business needs to fully understand how it works to deliver outcomes to customers, etc. Okay, fair enough. This means it has to understand how it uses its data and information. This knowledge is typically lacking. Process models are out of date and don't consider the data need, etc. So getting to the question, how should utilities approach this data challenge to understand the data value chain so that AI has the information it needs to be able to deliver the expected outcomes? Otherwise, if you don't know your business, how your business works, how will AI? So where's that disconnect, and how can that be fixed? I think that's how I'm reading that. So what are some thoughts on that? And again, I'll open this up to the entire panel. Let me reread the core question is, how should utilities approach this data challenge to understand the data value chain so that AI has the information it needs to be able to deliver the expected outcomes? Anybody want to take a shot at that one?
That is a meaty question.
Yeah.
There is a lot of meat on that bone. So first of all, this is an extremely hard thing. It's definitely one that needs to be asked, reflected upon. Um, I think for me is you can't automate what you can't articulate. And this is actually a case where we need data for AI. We need AI for data, but we might be able to leverage AI to understand data. So leveraging AI to start mapping those data flows. I know lots of organizations have process maps. Process maps are great if they're kept up to date. They're an artifact of a time long ago when they're not. But usually you can use agents to start mapping the data flows through the organization, and then you can start tying that to, business flows and value streams and et cetera. But I think you have to start in one spot to understand a flow, but not the entire organization because that can be overwhelming. Because where you start, I guess I had lots of thoughts in here. So first of all, if you're starting this expedition and you don't know exactly what's going on in your organization, we have to acknowledge that this is an archaeology problem. We're trying to discover the unknown. And the problem with that is no matter where you start, 3 steps down, when you learn something new, it may cause you to reevaluate your starting point. And you have to be open to that. And so it's not just enough to say, well, I want to map this data flow. Well, you're going to start there, but you may learn something that causes you to pivot, reevaluate what that actual start actually is. So just understand that it's an archaeological expedition, but if you're going to go through the hassle of doing it, you should also consider what is it going to take to make this a living, breathing thing that is maintained and curated. Otherwise, you're spending money on creating a treasure map that nobody will ever use in the future. And I think that's an unfortunate side effect of some initiatives that we do. They become great maps, but the treasure is long shifted and moved and been stolen by somebody else. So I'll just offer that there and let the other guys speak in on it. It's a tough question.
I totally agree that there's a lot on this question. I think the way I see it is, towards the end of the question, it does say that, like, AI is not going to understand your business if you don't understand it in the first place, right? So, I would touch on a couple of areas, right? So I would say the and the nature of this question kind of blends into identifying the data value chain and looking at how you can help with establishing data as an asset as part of this journey, right? So the AI tools come in and be part of your data value chain where they kind of travel along and sort of understand your data, right? So that's one way of like partnering with these systems, if I may, and um, start developing your first class assets with the data products. So that way you have like ownership established, quality expectations, and start moving more towards the semantic layer building. So that kind of yields with your structured and unstructured data that you're focusing on will start bringing you outcomes like you're preparing data as like AI ready data. So I would say this. The right approach is to make the data value chain more explicit and go in sequence, in steps, like one decision at a time, and let AI grow over time with the understanding of your data and other assets, and eventually your to some extent your business as well.
Okay. Thank you, Govind, for that. I'm keeping an eye on the clock because we are getting close to the end, and the questions continue to roll in. There was one here that I did want to hit on before we get close to wrapping up. Pretty interesting one. It's a very short one, but it's pretty interesting. Do you include your lawyers in reading licenses? And I think as we think about the traditional technology life cycle to what it is today, and some of the recommendations we're hearing. So where do you let the attorneys in on this, and how are they helping you make sure you don't overcommit or undercommit to something when you're acquiring a lot of this technology that the business is going to rely on?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. We have a separate procurement office that we use for all of our contracts. And so are they lawyers? No. Are they well-versed in contract negotiation, contract language, and production for our organization? Absolutely. They are trying to catch up with this just like everybody else. What does it mean? What does it mean that do we own the data? Do we not own the data? What provisions do we have? Or if we wanted to get out, how do we, like, all of those things, they provide that expertise. Depending on the risk that they feel like is associated with it, they will bring our attorneys into a discussion when needed, but we really let that be driven by the procurement office as they do their negotiations and contract updates.
Yeah, very similar within people as well. The legal review is very early, and it's very well embedded in our governance model, the AI governance model that we have. Our legal partners work with us very closely, especially engaging us on the AI Center of Excellence space. The examples that I mentioned earlier, when we bring in SaaS-based tools, we do explicit reading of their contract documents and things, and especially on the regulatory use case, I mentioned that we had quite a bit of in-depth discussion between our lawyers, and in cases we also have some opinions from the external councils to take some perspectives about how some of more technological areas are involved. So what we've seen so far is that it hasn't slowed our process down largely, but then it relieves us from a lot of tension about how well have we thought through about the risks and what are some strategies to mitigate those risks. That's how I would frame it.
Okay. I want to ask one here that I think is going to be a good note for us to end on. Let me make sure I got it here. Yeah. So this person says, I'm looking to learn from the panel on what they have implemented that has material impact. Can you share examples? So maybe this is a case of where you're getting a bit bigger bang for your buck. Maybe it's something where what you promised has been greatly exceeded in terms of business value or outcomes. So where are you seeing an impact? Are there specific use cases, or maybe there's some technologies you've been able to leverage across broader departments or across the enterprise? So where are you getting that material impact? Can you, maybe each of you share some examples, and obviously Govind and Don within your organizations, and Joe, maybe what you've observed with some of your clients. So Govind, let's start with you.
Actually, can I start? Because I kind of need to hop to a 2:30.
Okay. Let's do it.
Sorry. All right.
No worries.
For us, we see. I'll say three things. One, we see significant impact with any type of document summary. And so think about claims. Think about new policies that are coming in. How do we summarize those documents and give people an opportunity in order to make the decision much faster than going through a 5,000-page medical summary of someone who was in an accident? We get that. So I think that's one piece. There's a document summarization. I think the other one is this ingestion of our new business work and document ingestion for endorsements that we need to make. That AI can make those endorsements for us versus having to have four humans touch it along the way. We can eliminate all those touches. So it's a speed issue and also an expense issue. The other one is we have a third party that we're using that we outsource to one of our partners in India. And we've been able to take a look at that and be able to say, actually, we can pull some of that in-house because we can use generative AI on some of the transaction processing that they were doing. And the last one's around art coding. I can't remember if it was Govind or Joe talked about the ability to use generative AI to do some of the IT coding. Insurance is all data. There's no real physical product that we have. And so there's a lot of data. There's a lot of systems to do that. So our IT departments, compared to other industries, is super, super high. The number of people that we have within our IT departments, and a lot of those people are doing engineering roles. And because of that, we can have an impact on, really, for us, it's been throughput so far, But as we've outsourced some of that work, we've been able to start some strategies and some work in order to insource more of that work and really not need those third parties, which equals millions of dollars off our budget on an annual basis. So those are some of the things that are probably the big hitters for us. And
Yeah,
thanks, everybody. I do have to run, but thanks, Mike.
very, very good. Thank you, Don. Very good. And
Thanks, guys.
Govind, I'm going to jump over to you. And where are you seeing that impact? What are some examples of that?
I will pick some examples across various value streams where we have seen some measurable outcomes, right? So if I touched upon this use case for the customer digital agent and the customer value stream space. What we implemented is a digital assistant that integrated well with our existing customer information system or billing and payment. So we have a capability that kind of digital assistant knows when to hand off for complex use cases to a human in the loop. So some of the gains that we had in the process is it certainly handles the routine interactions like the billing and the payments, and that in the past needed a lot more live agent. Now we are moving down to like a agent assisted. So our 24/7 availability is a key material gain in the process. And then overall, we have seen a gain in the handle time and repeat contacts, right? That's something I would call in the customer space. In the enterprise services, next generation enterprise services space, again, I touched upon this on the rate case, the discovery and response agents. We've seen like what we've implemented right now is AI-assisted agentic workflows that is fully traceable and viewed by humans before the submission process, right? The material gains that we've had is significant reduction in the discovery response cycle time overall. And then there is manual effort goes significantly down across various business units, across the legal, regulatory, compliance, and analytics team. We've also had some, to go back to the customer value streams, there's automation. I think we touched upon this in the panel earlier about like how bots come in handy in certain areas for the automation, especially around the no-bill, where we have a very clear identification of rules-driven space that mirror to cache is a great example. And we've seen like faster resolution of billing issues. I would call that out. Also in the predictive field operations and asset management management space, we have seen reducing unnecessary truck rolls. We've seen like reduction in avoidable field work, like we have improved crew productivity. So what I would summarize is like across various fields, as we embed AI into the existing workflows, we are starting to see a lot of material gain by plugging in AI into our existing workflows and not have AI as a standalone tool.
Yeah, good stuff. Boy, we'll have to have a discussion offline because I had as many questions as you answered there. So that was good. Joe, let's give you the last word very briefly. Maybe where are you seeing material impacts with some of your clients that you work with?
So from a material impact perspective, we're seeing agentic solutions, right? Multi-agent teams, orchestrating processes, reducing handoffs between folks, really drive meaningful value. We have a Fortune 10 company. We help them implement this agentic solution to research unreconciled payments for their accounts receivable department, and they were able to reduce that reconciliation time from 4 days down to 1. By leveraging agentic solutions. So we're seeing that type of gain with agent solutions. We're seeing it, in the coding space. We're seeing it in the merger acquisition space. But the thing I would want folks to walk away with is the idea of using AI for document summarization, understanding, generation, code generation. Those are table stakes, and those are necessary learning curves for your organization to build an internal capability and understanding of an AI tools. And do not skip it. Do not dismiss it because it is table stakes. It doesn't necessarily draw top line revenue numbers. It doesn't necessarily meaningfully decrease your operational expense, but it is a necessary skill that you have to start exercising to use some of those more advanced solutions.
All right. This has been great. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank our panelists. We didn't get to all the questions, but we have those documented, and we'll do some follow-up on that. And I'm going to hand it back over to our production manager, PJ. PJ, take it away.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, panel. Fantastic presentation. And especially thanks to Centric for making today's event possible. For everyone tuning in, keep an eye out for a follow-up email with a link to the replay. And before you go, please take a moment to fill out our survey. Your feedback helps us make each PowerSession even better, and we'd love to hear what you thought of today's event. On behalf of the entire Energy Central team, thanks for spending part of your day with us. We look forward to seeing you on an upcoming event. This concludes today's presentation. Have a great day, everyone.